Hi, and welcome back to Small Town Murders. I'm your host, Faith. Small Town Murders is a podcast where I talk about small towns and the horrors that happen within them. So shut off your lights and lock your doors. This is the case of the Halloween that changed everything. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. It's only me today. But I really want to get into some main basic facts about the victims and their stories like we always do. So basically this case takes place on October 31st to November 1st of 2004 in Napa, California. And for those of you who don't know, Napa, California is about an hour north of San Francisco. So the community is described as close-knit and a really nice community up until this crime. But I just want to take a minute to talk about the victims. So we have three girls. They were all roommates. Their names were Leslie Ann Mazara, Adrienne and Sonia, and the third roommate, Lauren Menzina. So to understand the case, just for some background info, Leslie and Adrienne shared the second, the bottom floor of the house that they shared. And then Lauren took the upper floor. But let's just talk about the girls first. So Leslie and Adrienne had recently moved to Napa because they decided to focus on their careers. Because they weren't just normal 20-year-olds. They wanted to focus on their lives. So Leslie was a former beauty queen. She had just gone through a breakup, but things were looking up because she was just offered a job as a greeter for a winery run by the Francis Ford Coppola. Now, if you don't know that name, that is the director of The Godfather. And Adrienne was living in Calistoga, about 45 minutes north of Napa Valley, and she had recently completed her bachelor's degree in civil engineering at the California Polytechnic State University. And at the time, she was offered a job for the Napa Sanitation District as an assistant engineer. So things were going really good for these two roommates that shared the bottom floor. Now, Lauren and the two girls, which Lauren is the third roommate, there was some drama happening because Lauren would bring her boyfriend over and there was just a lot of stuff happening, but they eventually got over it and things were going great until we get up to October 31st of 2004. Okay, so even though, we said, the drama was going back to normal for the most part, everything was fine, and that leads us up to Halloween, where they were just doing regular Halloween things. They were handing out candy to trick-or-treaters that were in the community until about 11, and then after they just went to bed. But at 2 a.m., all the girls were awoken by a very loud noise from the downstairs, and Lauren, who survived this, only two of the roommates died, which were on the bottom floor, which is Adrienne and Leslie, but we'll talk about them in a minute. But Lauren would later describe the sound as shattering glass. So a window got broken open. And then she heard the blood-curdling screams of her roommates on the lower level of the home and very heavy footsteps. So she knew she had to escape because she was hearing footsteps get louder. And in her fear and confusion, she ran out to the backyard, which then she realized she was trapped with 6 feet of fence and it was enclosed. So she's like, oh no, what do I do? But actually that decision would save her life because the killer would go back out through the window after killing Leslie and Adrienne, and she would walk back into the house. Now, when Lauren walks back into this house, she is absolutely horrified. She couldn't believe what was in front of her. So basically, she walks into one of the girls' bedrooms. I couldn't figure out if it was Leslie's or Adrian's, but it's one of the girls' bedrooms. And she finds Leslie face down in a 2-inch deep puddle of blood, which I don't think we realize the aspect. This is what I found on my sources, but it was a lot of blood. And then when she walked closer into more into the bedroom, she saw Adrian. She was bleeding and barely alive. It was horrendous. And the amount of blood was so great in that room that when Lauren tried to get out of the room because of her shock, she actually slipped on blood on her way out. And it's when I think about what Lauren could have saw, because I didn't see crime scene photos. I normally don't look those up just because out of respect for the victims. But thinking about what Lauren saw, those girls were her friends. They lived together, and she saw both of them dead. And it's just horrifying. But continuing on, who would want to kill these girls? And, why? Why would, these girls were sweet. They were getting on with their lives. They were moving up in the world. But why would someone want to kill them? Since this case happened in 2004, some documents and evidence are really difficult to find. But what I found is it actually took a longer time to determine the killer's identity. But after 11 months, in many failed DNA samples, they had a bunch of pieces of evidence, but they couldn't figure out how to piece it together. But they found cigarette butts on the perimeter of the scene. And it was advertised to the news, there were sketches on the news. And the suspect's family, later convicted suspect, convinced him to come in. And his name was Eric Kopel. And Eric Kopel was then asked to give a voluntary DNA sample, which he did, and those cigarette butts were found to be his. So, not even 3 days after they released that evidence finding the cigarette butts, Eric knew he was over, so not even 3 days later, he came into the police station, he gave a DNA sample, and then he was arrested. So, rule of advice, if you are a smoker, do not smoke on the crime scene, that you will murder somebody because they will find it. And I was watching one of the the videos I was watching, they had 71 pieces of evidence, but those 3 or 4 cigarette butts they found on the scene led to the killer, which is wild to me. But also amazing what DNA technology can do even in 2004. Talking about Eric Kopel, which we don't know a lot about his background, but we do know he was described as a good guy, caring, outgoing, and he was just, which is really confusing because we always hear the murderers were these amazing people and all these true crime documentaries, but then they do this, they just snap, which is just really confusing because you would think there would be some kind of predetermined, oh, this guy could be a murderer. But he wasn't. He was described as a good guy by friends and family, which is just wild. I know I keep saying wild, but it's actually crazy to me. How many true crime documentaries have you seen where the killers, they were completely unsuspected until they actually killed someone? Anyways, I digress. Let's get back into talking about Eric Kopel. So, like I said, not much was known about his background. But he was married to Adrian's best friend, Lily Protome. We'll talk about Lily in a minute because she is wild as well as her husband. Now, Lily and Adrian, they were co-workers, gym buddies, and though their friendship was brief since Adrian had recently moved, they were still good friends. They worked together. They were used to each other. But why would Eric kill his wife's coworker? Now, there are really only two motives that investigators can think about. And it was that he saw personal relationships that Lily was having as like an attack on him and like getting pulled away from Lily because he was possessive apparently. And that was really it. But the confusing part is that Lily then publicly defended her love for Eric at his trial, saying nothing he could ever do would make her love him any less. So, like, for me, this motive seems really confusing because if he knew Lily loved him that much, her hanging out with her friends on a regular friendly basis shouldn't be drawing up red flags for him. But if he is possessive, if he does have other issues, maybe that was an issue for him. Maybe he didn't want Lily to have any relationships besides him. Okay. And that's really like the only motive, but there's another possible reason for the crime, and he claimed that he remembered leaving his house with a knife, but then for the rest of the crime and the rest of that night, he quote unquote blacked out and didn't remember anything. But there's always like a little white lie because he then proceeded when he got back home, he burned his clothes and shoes that night. So he had to remember something. Like there is no way you say you quote unquote blacked out and you don't remember anything. So the trial. Eric was in fact given 2 life sentences at his trial in 2007, and he is currently serving them at the Pleasant State Prison in Coalinga, California, and he will most likely die in prison. And as for Lauren, who was the only surviving roommate, she lived on the second floor, if we remember, she has actually kept a very low profile since the actual crime, like the initial news stories, like if they interviewed her and things like that. Since then, she's kept a very low profile, apart from a single interview from the Napa Valley Register. So we don't really know much about her now. And it's just a very sad story about these 3 girls. I mean, they had great starts in life. They were going places in the world, and it's just tragic that their lives were taken so early because they could have achieved so many great things. But I think that's all I have for today, so thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.